Today on the channel, we're looking into the disappearance of Theo Hayez, a case with a mysterious digital trail of clues. How could Theo, who is known to be level-headed and cautious, go missing during a trip to Australia? And what have investigators learned from information gathered by Theo's phone? Let's look into this. On November 12, 2018, 18-year-old Belgian backpacker Theo Hayez landed in Melbourne, Australia. When he arrived in Melbourne, he was greeted by his godfather, JP. He stayed with JP and JP's family at their home in the Otways for over a month. From late December 2018 to May 2019, Theo traveled around Australia. He planned to return home later so he could study to get into school for engineering. On New Year's Eve, he met up with his cousin Lisa in Sydney, and he stayed with her in Melbourne for most of January. While he was staying with Lisa, he worked at the Australian Open tennis tournament. At the end of January, he went to Shepparton, and he did some farm work and stayed there for a few weeks. In February, Theo was in Melbourne and Tasmania. In March, Alice Springs, Darwin, Litchfield, and Kakadu. He worked for a family in Cairns in April and visited the Great Barrier Reef that month. This brings us to May 2019, an important month in the timeline. After traveling down the east coast of Australia, spending some time in Brisbane, and taking a bus to the Gold Coast, Theo arrived at Byron Bay at the end of the month. It's known as Australia's celebrity haven, and it's also a tourist destination. When he arrived, he checked into the Wake Up hostel. While he was in Byron Bay, it's assumed that he looked around as a tourist and saw the sights of Byron Bay. On the 31st of May, that's where the story starts to get strange. On the evening of May 31st, at 9:35, Theo arrived at Cheeky Monkeys. This is a popular bar in Byron Bay. There's reports that say that locals don't have a favorable opinion of this place, and we're going to see one of the reasons why that's the case shortly. Theo wasn't at the bar alone. He was with a group of people from the hostel he was staying at, and while they were there, they discussed European politics and had a few drinks as well. Now at 11 p.m., staff at the bar asked Theo to leave because they thought he was too drunk to be there. They thought he was approaching intoxication, and Theo did leave the bar, but shortly after leaving the bar, Theo disappeared. Days passed without any word or update from Theo, and his family became worried, so they started to investigate. His family learned that Theo had not taken a bus to Sydney as he had planned. His last bank transactions were at Cheeky Monkey's bar the night he disappeared, and Theo's passport and belongings had been left at the hostel. His family knew something was wrong here, and they reported him as missing 5 days after he vanished.
It is vital that investigators get access to Theo's WhatsApp account without delay.
Theo's mom knew about some of his social media accounts. She started using some of his old passwords to try to access these accounts, and she had no luck at first, but eventually she was able to get into one of them, and it was his Google account. And this account would give investigators a really good idea of what Theo did after he left the bar that night. The data shows that after he left the bar, Theo walked towards Kingsley Street, where he stopped to enter the address of his hostel in the Google Maps. After this, he stopped at the end of Tennyson Street for nearly 7 minutes. There's actually camera footage from 11:08 p.m., and at this time we see Theo walking alone while looking at his phone. He walks out of the frame, and this is the last time he's actually seen on camera. So from here, the information we know comes from his phone. And it's important to note that Theo could have been separated from his phone during this time. After he walked out of the frame of the camera footage, he walked across a sports field and wound his way through the suburbs to Massinger Street. During this walk, he was checking his phone for directions back to his hostel. Finally, Theo reached Milne Street, and the place where he stopped looks over Arakwal National Park. From here, you can see the ocean and a lighthouse. Some investigators believe that Theo wanted to get a closer look at the lighthouse, and that explains the actions that he took next. Theo didn't end up taking the Milne track, which leads straight to Tallow Beach. Instead, he headed on a separate bush track heading north. Data from his phone revealed that he was nearly jogging through Arakwal National Park in pitch black. He keeps traveling in the opposite direction of his hostel, further into the bush. At 11:48, Theo reaches Tallow Beach. He walks to a place called Cozy Corner at the northern end of Tallow Beach. Just before midnight, Theo leaves the beach at Cozy Corner and walks back into the bush, towards a steep hill with thick brushland and lantana. While surrounded by vines and isolated from the outside world, he stopped for 5.5 minutes. After this, Theo took less than 2 minutes to go back down to the beach at the base of the Cape Byron Cliffs. GPS tracking data from Google ended at 12:05 a.m. on Saturday, June 1st. Investigators think that he turned off his location services to save battery. Despite this, there was still activity on his phone that could be traced. At 12:20 a.m., Theo sent his friend a message about the band U2 on Facebook Messenger. 3 minutes later, he watched a couple of minutes at the start of a French comedy video. At 12:55 a.m., Theo's stepsister in Belgium received a text from him. It was a lighthearted reply to an earlier text message she had sent. Almost 13 hours later, at 1:42 p.m., the last signal from Theo's mobile phone was detected in the Cape Byron area. The search for Theo was extensive. It was a large-scale air, sea, and land search. Days of searching for any trace of Theo turned into weeks, but nothing was found. That was until July 7th, when volunteers searching for Theo found a gray puma cap in the brushland near Tallow Beach. The cap had the same markings to the one Theo would wear, and it was found in a location that matched one of Theo's GPS locations. On September 16th, police announced that they had referred the case to the New South Wales coroner. What followed was a coronial inquest. Inquests are different from trials in that they investigate the circumstances of a death to prevent similar circumstances in the future. This brings us to the police's working theory, which is death by misadventure. Police think that Theo wanted to get to the Cape Byron Lighthouse. Quote, "The lighthouse is one of the most popular things to do in Byron Bay, and those movements are all in that direction. Not towards the wake-up hostel, but towards the lighthouse," unquote, said Senior Constable Phil Parker, a detective working on the case. The constable also said that he had walked along the Milne track at night during the investigation. He noted it was intimidating and scary. He said that if Theo had tried to walk up to the deceptively easy grassy side of the cliff from Cozy Corner, he may not have realized that the other side was steep and unstable shale. During the inquest, a similar incident in 2014 was brought up by police. This is when surfer Stuart Butler was swept out to sea while surfing with friends at Tallow Beach. Despite extensive searches similar to those for Theo, no trace of Stuart was ever found. The area where Stuart was swept away was almost exactly at Theo's last known GPS location. Senior Constable Parker also told the inquest he thought Theo was dead because his bank and social media accounts had not been used since he went missing. Members of Theo's family disagree with the police theory. They have their own theory about what happened. Somebody else was involved with his disappearance. They feel it would have been completely inconsistent with his character to have attempted such a climb. They also said that he would not have gone on the bush track alone. Nigel Phair, a cyber expert, analyzed data from Theo's phone and discovered that Theo's phone made a Wi-Fi handshake with another mobile device. The family also received an anonymous tip that made it seem like Theo had been a victim of local drug dealers who could have harmed him. It's important to note that the coronial inquest did not rule out foul play as a possibility with this case. The search for Theo is ongoing. While the police and the family disagree about what happened to him, one thing is certain, and that is that this case is still unsolved. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.